Dear students, let us begin with the third part of the lesson on internal determinants of foreign policy, in which we will discuss about nature of leadership, defense needs and strategy and domestic factors. Nature of leadership. The personal qualities of leaders guiding the destiny of a nation at a given time tend to shape the country's foreign policy in a particular direction. For instance, Woodrow Wilson played a significant role in shaping the foreign policy of the United States in the early decades of the 20th century, and Gorbachev played a role in making the Soviet policy for balkanization of the Soviet Union. Similarly, India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, who steered India's policy for more than one and a half decades, was widely regarded as internationalist in outlook. Nehru was indeed regarded as one of the tallest of visionaries in his times. India's foreign policy during his tenure was more committed to world peace and disarmament. Panchashil was a typical representation of the Nehruvian outlook to approaching problems with other countries. Being an idealist, Nehru failed to predict that China would attack India in 1962. In contrast, in the case of the influence of his daughter Indira Gandhi had a strong and decisive personality. She was very pragmatic and sensitive to the imperatives of vital national interests, left an imprint on reorienting the foreign policy along the lines of realism than idealism. This is how India's policy with reference to the liberation of Bangladesh, refusal to sign the nuclear non-proliferation treaty and strengthening of ties with the former Soviet Union may be viewed. One must recognize Indira Gandhi's contribution while India was involving in East Pakistan crisis and sent troops to make Bangladesh as an independent state. Further, under the leadership of Indira Gandhi, India refused to sign nuclear non-proliferation treaty as the treaty was discriminatory in nature. Atal Bihari Vajpayee had influenced the policy of engagement with Pakistan and the United States. Under the leadership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, India was able to successfully went for nuclear test in 1998. Narendra Modi's activist policy was widely lauded. His foreign visits during his first tenure fetched results for India's prestige all around the globe. India, as a president of G20 under the leadership of Narendra Modi, India was able to articulate our strengths across the world. Defense needs and strategy. We are witnessing a dramatic shift in the locus of global power with the relative decline of the United States and the rise of China. The rise of China and India will alter the geopolitical landscape and the nature of the global system in the near future. Despite growing economic interdependency between China and the United States, trends suggest a potential for greater power conflict in the Asia Pacific region, which will have consequences for India's security. India's enhancement of power and influence should continue to be for the defense of its sovereignty, territorial integrity and promotion of global peace. India's indigenous development and manufacturing of defense equipment is weak. Therefore, the government has had to focus on defense preparedness through proactive strategic dialogues with the key partners like Russia, France, US, Israel, UK, Italy, etc. India has been working together with these partners to acquire and develop modern defense platforms for the armed forces. In the context of nuclear weapons, India has strictly adhered to all anti-nuclear proliferation measures, though it has not signed the NPT because the latter is discriminatory towards states which were not declared as nuclear weapon states under the treaty. India has always supported global nuclear disarmament. Indian nuclear weapons program is purely a self-defense measure given the security and strategic situation in India's neighborhood. India has pledged no first use of nuclear weapons and not to use them against non-nuclear weapon states. Indian defense forces and diplomatic apparatus are manifestations of India's commitment towards security and development. Domestic factors. No country's foreign policy can be immune from the influence of the dynamics within. Indeed, it is an important determinant of foreign policy. The domestic milieu refers to the nature of governing system, political culture, including the policies of political parties, public opinion, tradition, structure of government, and enlightened leadership. Independent India is a living example of unity in diversity. Having obtained freedom from the British after a non-violent struggle, India chose a democratic system that could offer an adequate representation to diversities of all regions, religions, and cultures. The executive is accountable to people's representatives who are chosen in periodical exercise of franchise. India's political system was based on Westminster model of parliamentary democracy. However much the executive would like to view foreign policy as its prerogative, parliamentary control over the executive has opened channels for influencing the country's foreign policy. India's foreign policy reflected the national consensus cutting across political differences between the ruling and the opposition parties. This, however, is not to say that the Parliament and the Prime Minister always looked eye to eye on all foreign policy issues all the time. Even during the time of Nehru, who had exercised more discretion than any other Prime Minister, Parliament sought to assent itself in respect of his policy vis-a-vis the boundary dispute with China and the Goa question in the late 1950s. Political parties too at the time of elections take positions on foreign policy matters in their respective manifestations. There are varied views expressed by the BJP at one end and the Communist Party at the other on issues related to globalization, World Trade Organization, and several other issues. Some of the regional parties like those in Tamil Nadu, DMK, AIDMK, MDMK, etc., and Jammu and Kashmir, the National Conference, for instance, have come to determine the country's policy towards Sri Lanka and Pakistan respectively. Public opinion ventilated through media and other channels and the activities of interest pressure groups like business associations have gained importance as determinants of India's foreign policy. The print and the visual media have been influential determinants of the policy. The two most notable examples of the role played by the television and print media in making India's approach to the hijacking of Indian Airlines to Kandahar in 1999 on the official announcement of the decision not to accede to the US request for sending troops to post-war Iraq. Let us summarize what we have discussed in this lesson. India's foreign policy is influenced by the internal determinants such as geography, population, history, political tradition, ideology, economic development, leadership, defense needs, and strategy. Further, India's foreign policy was influenced by its federal structure. India has benefited by the internal determinants in making foreign policy and executed its foreign policy effectively. I hope you understood the various internal factors that determine a country's foreign policy. We have concluded our lesson on internal determinants of foreign policy. Thank you.